Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint to self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, a life coach, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution to help you reach your greatest potential. What happens when two women with similar backgrounds do the healing work and then set out on a mission to hold other people's hands while they transition from a place of stuck and broken to finding their own level of healing and transformation? The answer is pure magic. That's the only way I can describe the next hour of conversation you are about to embark on. I sat down with Lauren of Love to talk about self-gaslighting, but what transpired was a whole different level. The most important conversation, the most empowering conversation I've had the pleasure of having on and off the podcast in quite some time. As Lauren calls it, we riffed back and forth through so many elements of growth that you are likely going to need a pen, a piece of paper, and an extra time to pause and rewind so you do not miss a single detail of what she and I let flow between us. This is one conversation dripping in transformation. Let's not waste another second. Let's get right to it. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. We're diving in, and we're diving in hardcore today. If you've been on Instagram or really any social media at this point, you probably know my guest. And if you don't, shame on you. So, Lauren, I want to know a little bit about you. We were just chatting. Our backgrounds seem very similar. And I just want you to kind of tell us who you are and how you came into this space of really empowering people and providing this space of courage, self-love, and getting your shit together.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. And I love how you introduced this container that we're opening up as like, we're diving in deep. There's no other way. I feel like there's no other way, you know?
Agreed.
Yeah. So like my life, oh my gosh, this is such a complex question. How do you answer it, in a contained way? But my life was a series of restrictions and rules and expectations, right? From my family, from my upbringing. And there was a really deep programming within me embedded early on to not be real, to not be raw, to, put the face on and have it all together for everybody in the world. And
Right.
yeah, so as you know, like we were both in the television industry, and I pursued that career because my dad was in the television news industry. So again, this pattern of like wanting to receive love and get everybody to be proud of you. But that kind of all came to a head for me when I had a really dark night of the soul. I was leaving an abusive marriage. My career was kind of falling apart. And I was just like waking up to the fact that I was really living a lie. And I went on a very deep healing journey for myself. This was back in 2015. And I had 2 years into that was like, I don't want to be faking it anymore. Like I'm over it. So I actually quit my job. I pulled my 401k and I was like, I want to help people like heal the way I'm healing. And that's kind of how it all started. And, I've been in the online space since then, designing courses and sharing my medicine in my unique way as I figure out my healing journey and document my own path and help others do the same. And so yeah, it's been an ever unfolding process, but the short answer is I was pushed into this because my life went through hell and back.
We have the same story. You know that. It's so interesting to have those dark nights. What's even crazier is the majority of the people that have been on this podcast have said from 2014 to 2017 have been those big shifts. It's so interesting.
It's very on purpose. And it's quite fascinating because then you also talk to people who say, well, I didn't go through that between 2014, 2017, but 2018, 2019 kicked my ass. It was like two phases, right?
Yeah.
So high five to phase one. Like we got
Hey.
we got through it first to help other people. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
very, very common. I hear that we're all collectively moving through the same thing.
I believe that deep and I see it every day. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, I wish I would have known that, 10 years ago." I'm like, "You weren't supposed to. We're
Nope.
not supposed to." And speaking of what we don't know until we know it, let's dive in. Let's talk about, ugh, it almost like sits right in my throat because so many people do this. Let's talk about self-gaslighting, what it is, and how it becomes the roadblock, the
Mm.
impasse to self-love.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, this is such a juicy conversation. I feel like what would be really cool is if we could start this conversation with some unique definitions, right? Like,
Beautiful.
yeah, and
Mhm.
I want to like hear yours too. Like, I'm so
Yeah.
curious. Like,
Mhm.
how do you define self-gaslighting? Yeah, you maybe you go first. I'll go in with mine as well because I feel like
Yeah,
we'll mirror each other a little bit.
I agree. So, interestingly enough, let's take all the clinical definitions out of it, and
Please.
I just wanna use one word: manipulation.
Mm, mm,
Ouch.
ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like
Yeah.
distortion. I think
Mhm.
distortion is a really big
Mhm.
part of it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is the self-perception getting in the way with the reality, with the comparison. My story doesn't matter, the trauma doesn't matter, the thing doesn't matter because it's not as bad as somebody else's.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, that story that plays out immensely. Like
Mhm.
there's so many things that I feel really presence themselves on a healing journey that bring up this root of,
Yeah.
well, it's not so bad for you because other people have it worse.
Right.
Or I see this a lot as a self-healing guide in my programs where women will say, well, my trauma is like not a capital T trauma.
Yeah.
So I feel bad feeling bad about it.
Mhm.
Or even like, well, my capital T trauma isn't as big as like her capital T trauma. So like and just
Okay. Yeah.
oh
Mhm.
my God, like
Mhm.
how this is crazy. And this is from my experience, this is only one layer of how like self-gaslighting comes up. So yeah, so
Right.
just to kind of come back to like that point of like what is self-gaslighting, I feel like at the root of it, it is the question of our own integrity and our own knowing,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
bypass, that's even like bypassing, right, certain
Right.
things. And I feel like it's all really rooted in growing up as children where our personal needs were abandoned and our desires were questioned and dismissed,
Ugh.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
like what was important to you? Was it
Mhm.
why is that important to you? That shouldn't be important to you. You shouldn't really
Right.
care about that,
Mhm.
That goal you have, that's why do you want that? That's kind of
Right.
selfish, right? So
Yeah.
all of this like questioning in the psyche that like deprograms us into a state of, oh my God, neurosis. It really is what a crazy town.
Absolutely. And more so, if you were even in a space where you even got to have an opinion to begin with,
Oof.
right? And that's
Mm,
a big, big thing. And we don't even realize that we have, like you said, programmed and been programmed into, well, this is the way it is. You
mm,
serve, you do for me, you care about my feelings, set yours aside. Take yourself off on the sideline of the road and leave
mhm.
yourself there, but please be in forward motion for me. It's heart-wrenching, but it's a
It's
setup.
not, yeah, and I think what's really fascinating is that as humans, like I'm assuming a large majority of your community here is focused on their development, their healing,
Yeah,
and their growth. And so high
yes.
five to everybody who's listening because we're breaking these patterns, but they're generational, right?
Mhm.
And so there's also this aspect of immensity where almost what we're conditioned to believe and feel and think is not just a something that we have to dewire and deprogram from our history, but it's like the
Mhm.
generations that came before us. Like they even have this study. I don't know if you've heard of it, the cherry blossom study. Have you heard of
Yes.
it? Yeah. So,
Mhm.
this is fucking crazy. Like
Yeah.
mice that were bred over and over again to feel fear of cherry blossoms because they were
Yeah.
being electrocuted.
Mhm.
generations later, they're still freaking out about the smell. And it's like, well, how does that affect us? Like, you know?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, all these things are just passed down with such immensity. And yeah, there's like the patriarchal perspective. I mean, where do you want to go with this conversation, girl? There's so much.
There's so much.
It's so good.
We go wherever led. How about that? Go
Yeah.
where led. You know what I find really interesting, and this is a sidestep to the conversation, but you just brought up something that made me think about it, is the generational part of it. I know in the line of women that I came from, high performing, high, march, prove yourself. And then there was also the programming of just be average, right? You don't need to be anything in
Mm,
between. I'm like, hello, people pleaser and perfectionist, sign me up, right?
mhm.
And it's that space where you realize I'm literally killing myself because for generations I have been required to be X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
It is self-gaslighting.
100%. And I think it's like women can we it's almost like we can't get it right. You know, like
Hmm.
if you're
Hmm.
I think they kind of explain this a little bit in the Barbie movie. I was watching that. I was like, yeah, that's pretty accurate. She made her big speech and she was like, if you work too hard, you're a workaholic and you're an
Yeah.
overachiever and you don't put your family first. And then if you put your family first, you're being lazy and you're mooching off of men and you're not independent enough. And it's just this very like I think what ends up happening is that we're so obsessed with trying to get it right that we forget that what actually is right, it was what feels right to our bodies,
Yes.
right? And that's where gaslighting is really such a powerful thing. And it starts outside of us. It starts with, the projections of what we think we're supposed to be, the projections of what we think we should do and how we should behave. And then when we're tired because we're not working in alignment because we're burning ourselves
Right.
out, we think, oh, you're not supposed to feel that way. That's something wrong with you. You should
Hmm.
be thriving like everybody else you see. Or, when you have a desire to stay at home and go live in a fucking forest and just like be
Hmm.
yourself, you're like,
Right.
well, that's wrong because like I should want to be driven. And just like all these like weird things that start outside of us with programming, but then they live within us and our healing is about detangling things. And it's really the unfinished business of our childhood and unfinished business of the generations that came before us.
Mm. The way you just put that actually gave me chills
Mm,
because the untangling part.
mm,
Who am I? What do I want? I always ask four questions. What do I want? What do I need? How do I want to feel?
mm,
And how am I going to get there? Those four questions tend to be the baseline to everything. But if you've never asked yourself that question, you've been marching based on what has been handed over,
mm.
you are exactly where you just said, I want this, but I can't have that. I'm doing this, but this
Yeah.
sucks. I don't love where I am. It's hard.
It's really hard. Yeah. And as you're speaking that, I kind of have like, I'm like, I have four questions for that too, right? Like if I'm feeling a thought, a limitation, a self-imposed kind of restriction, something that feels like it's kind of sticky and lower
Mhm.
vibration, my four questions are like, whose voice is that?
Yeah.
Right? Who taught me that? And then do I want to really choose to believe that? And then
Mhm.
finally, who would I be if I didn't?
Mhm. Mhm.
And like that's what we're talking about the detangling. It's like uncovering these elements of a neurosis and psychosis. And like that's what Ram Dass used to call it. It's like we're all
Mhm.
neurotic, but just
Yeah.
unraveling these things and being like, do I really want to actually live my life dictated by somebody else's rules and
Mhm.
guidelines? That's a really big thing. And then, there's a whole other component of this, which we haven't touched, which just to speak to briefly for my healing journey I went through huge chronic illness issues because of my exhaustion and my burnout. Yep.
Mhm.
And then we get to this is the fun part. We get to experience gaslighting in like the
Yeah.
doctor's office, which is so
Yeah.
fun. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah. It is. And you know what? It's one of those spaces where you hit on it, is this how I want to live?
Mhm.
And to add to your four questions, my final question would be, what's keeping you from being that person?
Mm.
Because if you sit down with a pen and paper and you were forced to write out all of the things, all the reasons why, air quotes, that you are not that person, I guarantee you
Yeah.
probably 80%, if not more, of that list doesn't even belong to you to begin with.
Nope.
And that's what's scary, actually,
Oh, it's terrifying. It's
isn't
terrifying.
it?
Our identities, like I remember one time I was looping in just like obsession around my career and trying to achieve and everything. Something was always wrong. And my one of my employees was like, Lauren, who would you be if you didn't have a problem to solve? And I was like, I don't fucking know.
Right? No one.
What? No idea. But yeah, it's just really funny. Like a lot of what we think we are is just story. That's it.
Hmm. 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 It makes me think of, I will say, tell me who you are without telling me whose spouse, whose partner, whose child,
What career?
who career, all the things, you know where I'm going. And they're
Yeah.
like, I'm like, yeah, right. It's hard. Like
Mm,
soulfully, deep down, why are you here?
mm.
What is the gap between that?
Yeah, and you know what's really crazy is like when we really heal and we do the deep work, the answer to that question is like just to experience and like
Hmm.
be. We're just
Hmm.
here to be. Like I can't, the amount of healing I had to do to get to that place of just like taking a breath and being like,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm gonna go run around in nature and yeah, I'm gonna just sit and be present and play music and dance and like honor
Yeah.
being a human and the inner child. Like we forget, we forget. And then maybe the journeys we're here to remember, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah.
So yeah, getting a little woo, but yeah,
No,
you get
it's
me.
we're woo here all day long. You made me think my son, I'm a mom of three, and my youngest is 11. My
Oh my
oldest
God.
is like almost 20, but we have a huge gap between our kids. And
Mm,
my son said to me the other day he had a problem going on, and I said, "How are you feeling about it? Like, how can I support you in your decision?" Right? Because that's how I talk to my 11-year-old because it's his life,
I
and I'm
like
just there to
that.
support, right? And
High five, mom.
thanks. And so he kind of got a solution going, and I said, "Great, I think it's good." A couple days later, I said, "How are you feeling about that?" He said, "Mom, I took a deep breath. I just sat in that for just a second. I was like, yes, that's it. That's why we're
Mm,
here, is
mm,
like get through it, to have that permission. Permission's huge.
yeah.
And then just to take a breath, right? And to play and
Yeah.
be back into that centered childness that we don't get, especially if had hard trauma.
Yeah, and coming back to that gaslighting component, it's like the as a child, I really learned at a young age that like the personal desires I had for play and joy and rest, especially rest, like those were things that like I shouldn't want and that I was
Right.
crazy for feeling. And when my needs, even what you're sharing about your children is like very inspiring because as a child I didn't have that, right?
Yeah, me
I
either.
was gaslit 24/7 where it's like being told not to feel a certain way and then you go
Mhm.
kind of, well, no, I'm not supposed to be upset and I'm crying too much and just all those things, right? So it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's really cool to see that we're living in a new generation of upbringing for
Yeah.
kids where we're getting to
Mhm.
like meet their needs. It's really beautiful.
Right. You just hit on the crying. I'm sure if you work with people individually like I do, you see, or, if you're in therapy or you're working with somebody like us, where somebody will start to cry and they apologize.
Oh yeah.
I want to come over the desk. I'm like, no, 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 let me
Mm,
hold you. Like, please
mm,
cry. That is
mm.
such a form of self-gaslighting, right? It's
Oh yeah.
the manipulation of the feeling.
Hmm.
Don't cry. Don't express anger. Don't express emotion. I'm sorry, are you human?
Yeah, and like a big part of what I discovered on my healing path and really like letting go of so much that I've been holding on to is that a lot of like trauma patterns were emotion trapped in my body, right?
Hmm.
And so when
Hmm.
we're like going into this place where we're not allowing ourselves to cry and we're not properly holding it and we're not allowing it to like be transmuted and
Hmm.
released, right? It ends up really manifesting as chronic illness and chronic
Right.
disease and distortion in our mental health. And like it's so important that we really hold safe space to allow energy to be in motion, to move
Yes.
out of the body. That's why, like, through my heal program work, when I'm holding space for students, I celebrate tears, right? Because
Hmm.
they're really actually trapped energy getting out of our field, and that is
Right.
such a beautiful sign of healing. So
Yeah.
yeah, go cry, people, go cry.
And do it hard. Do it hardcore, please.
Go in, man, go in.
Go so in. It's
Yeah.
it's so healing. I love that you said that, to just allow,
Mhm.
basically permit and do the things. It's not lost on me that you said, you got really sick. I did the same thing. It
Mm.
surprises a lot of people where they've been chronically ill for a long time. They've been moving through the emotions, trapping them back, going back and forth. They finally end up in a program like yours, in therapy, whatever.
Mhm.
And they say, I've been to doctor after doctor, and they cannot figure out what's wrong. And I'm like, okay, tell me what's going on. Like you need to understand the place that you feel physical pain and your emotions in your brain is the same place.
Mhm.
So if you are chronically ill, it could just be emotional pain
Mhm.
causing the illness. We have to get really clear on the fact that it's not always some big medical issue. It could be an emotional issue.
I think it always is. I mean,
Yeah.
how long did it take you when you had chronic illness to come to your clarity on that point?
It's so interesting because in 2016, I had a scale of events and it was intense. It happened all within 45 days, and I was hit with a migraine. And I mean, a migraine so intense that I was in the emergency room and they thought I had a brain tumor. That's how bad it
Wow.
was. It took another 6 to 7 weeks for me to get through all of that. And a nurse came in and she was like, honey, this is emotional pain. And I said, fuck off. Like,
Mm,
I wasn't in that space to receive that
wanna
information at
hear
that
it,
time.
yeah.
Yeah. I got through that and was doing okay. And then about 4 years later, I was hit again. And nothing really was the activator other than I think I was pushing myself too hard and I hadn't cleared from the first time.
Mhm. Mm.
Right. And so I guess it would be about a 5-year span.
Mm. So it takes so as long as it takes. One of my teacher
Right.
tells me sometimes, right? Like
Isn't
it's
that
like
hard?
and it's hard. It's hard. Yeah, especially because like for me in the line of work I do, like I see people who've had chronic health issues like fibromyalgia and like
Hmm.
skin conditions, women with like cerebral palsy and just like these weird kind of things, gut issues, right? All these
Hmm.
like autoimmune
Hmm.
conditions. And then these people get such huge results by walking through an
Yeah.
emotional perspective. And then I have to like look at my family and be like, I could help you with this, but like
Right.
they're not ready, right? And so it's
Mm,
that part, right? It like takes as long as it takes is a hard pill to swallow sometimes when you love people. But
yeah.
yeah, it took 5 years to kind of take a moment to be like, hey, wait a minute, take
Yes,
some time.
it
Compassion is
does.
really important.
It is the counter. Compassion is the counter to self-gaslighting. It
Yeah.
really is, right? Like if we weighed it and that those are
It
the
is.
those are the counterpoints.
Yeah.
So we've kind of talked about the signs and symptoms, right? When we have walked through this experience, we may not even realize that we are manipulating the self. We're changing our reality based on what we think we know.
Mhm.
How do we move out of it into some kind of beautiful
Um,
self-love? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question because, just like you told that nurse to fuck off, I feel I feel like when probably for like the first 7 years of my healing journey, when I heard the word self-love, I would literally be like, fuck off. Like
Exactly.
I hated that. Oh my God, I hated that word so much. I would roll my eyes at compassion. The word grace just felt like bullshit. I mean, like just
Right.
all these things that are just so far-fetched to somebody who's really like abusing herself. I think that the first step is really like what just is coming out very strongly in my psyche is like know thyself, right? You
Mhm.
can't
Mhm.
support, protect, serve, honor anything that you don't know deeply.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
like this is a part of the study, I think, of healing is coming into an intimate relationship with yourself where like, there are women who have never spent more than 15 minutes by themselves.
Right.
They're on their phone, they're texting, they're scrolling social media, they're serving their kids, they're doing the chores, they're listening to a podcast, watching
Mhm.
TV, right? We don't know what it's like to actually be present with ourselves. And I think
Yeah.
that that's a really important part of anybody's healing journey is to start to dedicate some space in your life to being in union with you. And
Mm.
that can look like, okay, I'm gonna like sit by a pond for 15 minutes and just stare, right?
Right.
Like that it sounds stupid, but like go do it and tell me how you feel,
Right.
right? And
Right.
tell me how long that 15 minutes feels to you, because it's gonna be fucking brutal if you're just doing it for the
Exactly.
first time. Right. So like that it's really important. And I think that's like kind of the first step. I think the second thing is to really invite in an awareness of our longings, and part of the way that we
Mm.
can actually heal those more constricted energies like shame or guilt or
Right.
frustration is to start to calibrate. Like some people when they're healing, they're like, I'm just gonna look at my shame a lot. And I'm just gonna
Yeah.
like, I'll just
No.
I'm just gonna sit with it and I'm just gonna like think about all the shameful things that I've been through in my life and like why I hate myself. And that's how I'll heal. Like, and there are a lot of people doing that, right? But
Yeah.
what I found to be really true is like light is where you can find the wounds, and that's where like the wound will
Yeah.
come in, right? Is when you embrace the light and you say, okay, well, I'm gonna work on discovering my longings. I'm gonna work on
Mhm.
discovering my purpose. I'm gonna work on discovering my sense of pride in myself, right? Whatever it may
Mhm.
be. And then as you're cultivating to that energy, whatever is not of the highest frequency and resonance with that is going to manifest, right?
Mhm.
So just that final piece of like being present and looking at, right? What is coming up in my interpersonal
Mhm.
relationships? What is
Yeah.
coming up in my connection to self? And what is
Yeah.
this teaching me, right? Like that that's really important. Like we can go through these things of being like, whoa, it sucks. Nobody believes in me and nobody's supportive and I don't love myself and blah blah blah. But like when those difficult things come up, it's really healthy to be like, what's the lesson here for my
Mhm.
highest good, right? Like
Mhm.
this is coming up to support me. Let me find the reason why. And that's like when you're a really good student of your healing journey, when you
Yeah.
see things that way. So
Yeah.
yeah, long-winded answer, but I think that kind of answers what you're asking here.
It absolutely does, and it wasn't long-winded at all. It's I will say, and I hear this a lot, and I always kinda giggle, and I always feel bad that I giggle, but people will say to me, "But why does there have to be a lesson in the hard shit?"
Oh, I like that question.
Uh-huh.
What do you have a response to that? Because I have one.
I do. My response is, "How else will you learn?"
Mm, yeah, I like
I mean, there's
that.
more to it, but obviously,
Yeah, no,
right? Like,
it's
how
pretty
else
clear. How else you gonna fucking learn? You don't have
how
a
else?
hard lesson to learn. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. I forget why. I had a Yeah, oh, I remember. This is a good one. So I have a friend of mine, and she was telling me that a friend of hers, they had a stillborn.
Mm,
And then just, yeah, and so she was navigating because she has a baby boy and her friend's baby was a boy and the baby didn't make it and they had them
yeah,
over for the first time after and there was a lot of grief and she was
right.
crying like hard. And my friend Sarah, she was like, sometimes you just like go through shitty things and like it just is shit and it's just shit because it's shit. And like
Exactly.
she was owning that. And then she said, and giving yourself permission to feel that later on you'll find the lesson,
Yeah.
right? Later on it will make sense. It doesn't have to make sense in every single moment. And like something I openly talk about on my platforms is like, I attempted suicide twice as a teenager. I was in psychiatric facilities admitting myself for months at a time
Mhm.
when kids my age were going to spring break parties in Florida,
Right.
right? And so I missed out on a lot and I suffered a really violent traumatic rape at the age of 19.
Mhm.
I look at all of that and I'm like, thank fucking God, right? Like, thank
Yeah.
God my
Mhm.
parents were the way they were and didn't meet my needs. Thank God that I went through difficult times. I didn't feel that way for years, right?
Right.
It took me a very
Yeah.
long time, but now I'm here doing the work I'm doing in the world and it all makes sense. And I
Right.
think that we have to hold space to give ourselves that permission to say that, like Steve Jobs said this in a commencement speech once. He's like, you have all these little dots of your life, and you never really know how they connect until one day you look back and they all
Mhm.
fit.
Mhm.
And that's how I see my life, and that's how I see life. And yeah, so yeah, things suck sometimes, but they all
They
make
do.
sense in the end.
Yeah. To Sarah, your friend, and
Mm.
to the friend that experienced that. I had a beautiful lady that I worked with who had a similar experience, and she later said something to me that will always stick with me, and so it jumped to my mind, and so I must absolutely share it.
Mm.
She said, without that experience, even though it was there was so much grief in that, I learned one thing that I never knew before. And it's different than what I learned later with my, child that actually made it all the way through here. I learned what unconditional love is.
Mm. Hmm. Yes.
Yes, right? And I
Yeah,
was like,
oh,
oh,
100%. Yeah,
yeah.
it's like that makes me very emotional to hear. It's like the depths of our sorrow actually teach us our greatest capacity to love,
Yeah.
and like that's
Mhm.
as part of this human experience. And I think that what really makes us sovereign beings, right? Because that's what we're doing when we're healing and we're detangling from programmings and all these things we're
Mhm.
talking about today. It's like when you embrace sovereignty, it's the understanding of your own personal resilience and learning how to
Yes.
hold yourself in darkness and learning how to hold yourself
Mhm.
in the depths of difficult experiences. Not to say that those things never happen,
Right.
right? But you're safe and you're sovereign and you're empowered because you know how to hold yourself. And like
Yeah.
that's healing. It's learning how to hold yourself in every
Yes.
capacity.
I love the way you just put that. It's a sit in it for a moment and hold that because it's so very, very true. How can I hold myself? It's been the theme of conversations that I've been having over the last 6 months where people are stay with yourself, hold yourself,
Mhm.
find permission. It's all the things that we really must do right now, right? And it's not a later thing. We are being driven into this space of clear the road,
Clear
guys.
the road and like clean up your side of the fence and like what you have
Mhm.
responsibility over. That's a big part of this is like a lot of people don't realize that suffering is really rooted in the idea that we can't change what we want to change and we can.
Mhm.
You may not be able to change everything that you desire to change, but everything
Right.
you want,
Mhm.
you have the capacity to change what needs to be changed to make that
Yeah.
happen, and that's what we need to remember. So, yeah, clean up your side of the fence, take agency
Mhm.
to hold yourself, to meet your needs, all those things. So
Yeah.
important.
I was doing an interview. It actually aired a couple weeks ago, and her name's Jennifer Amos. She's a fellow Insight Timer teacher, and she said, "Take some self-possession."
Oh,
Yeah, to be self-possessed.
yes, to
That's
own, like,
yeah.
mm.
Yeah, and it's like,
Yeah, I
oh,
like
I
that. I
know. I
feel
was
like I'm
like,
gonna adapt that. We need to make t-shirts. I feel like
I
things
know.
need to be like coffee mugs and like signs
Right?
on our doors. Yeah,
Yeah.
dude, we gotta empower each other, man. New
I know.
perspective.
I know. I was like, yes, ma'am. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am, on that one. Yes, yes. So let's talk about how we get here.
Yeah.
The self-possession, the self-authority, the giving ourselves space to call it whatever we want to, self-love,
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
doesn't matter, right? By the
Mhm.
way, I hated that word too. I was like,
Yeah,
love
it's hard.
myself. Ugh, gross, right? No, thank you.
I
I have been
know.
taught not to do that. I appreciate it so much. And just getting into a space where the allowance is there. So,
Mm,
where would you tell someone to start with that other than
mm.
getting to know thyself? I mean, that's in the
Yes.
first place.
Yes, the small steps, right? Like I think that that's you talk about these more grandiose principles of compassion and love and grace, they feel, yeah, just really aloof for a lot of people, like we
Yeah.
said. So I think starting, like for me, my greatest study in my healing journey really came through the realm of psychedelics, which I know is a very big stretch and shift in the dynamic of what we're talking about. But,
Yeah.
for me, like I had a lot of mental health challenges and was very overly
Hmm.
medicated for many years. So my brain needed some help in like
Right.
rewiring. And I think that like one of the best things we can do is prioritize the removal of like the toxic chemicals that we're really taking in.
Yes.
If, for me, it was like, yeah, I'm gonna drink celery juice and I'm gonna clean my water and get good healthy filtration system and I'm gonna cut out
Hmm.
coffee. And those things, when we're talking about like what we're really trying to do when we're healing and we're removing this relationship with gaslighting, is we're trying to find our inner knowing, right? and
Hmm.
and our inner knowing is stifled and really suffocated with all of the toxins that live in our environment, right? So that's
Yeah.
just like a really simple one-off thing. Start drinking healthy water,
Hmm.
start cutting out some of the substances and stimulants that we rely on in our reality, like, all these things. Yeah, so that's the first thing, just to help the body be in right relationship and to allow the mind to clear so you can find your inner knowing. I think also too, a great practice that was really sustainable for me was honoring the inner child. And
Hmm.
that is just very important because when we're talking about healing our relationship with gaslighting, we're really trying to remember and reclaim our individual unique essence as like a being, right? I
Yeah.
want what I want. I feel what I feel. I'm right because I'm feeling this. Intuitively, we want to just bring in all of that awareness, and
Right.
that's really severed in childhood. So one of the great medicines we can offer ourselves is to start to bring that in again. And this is, a lot of
Yeah.
people get confused. They're like, I don't know how to do that. But like when you were a kid, what did you love to do, right? Like I loved to
Hmm.
run around in my backyard in and out of trees pretending to be a lion, and
Yeah.
writing music and playing silly songs. And so I will do that. I will bring a drum and a rattle into the
Mhm.
forest in my backyard and I will
Yeah.
literally just play music. And maybe
Hmm.
you played with dolls. Go get some dolls. Maybe you love to color, you love to dance, like whatever it is. Like when we start to bring that back in, our nervous system starts to regulate and we come back into our hearts. And then we can start to really
Hmm.
know what's up and really pay attention to our truth. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's really interesting that you mentioned that. That's something that I have worked with so many women, to get back into that space of what I call the joys of pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
and getting into a space where it feels free. There's a little warning with it. When you start doing those things, beyond feeling silly, which is fine, right? Enjoy that, embrace it, is that sometimes hard shit comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's always, if it comes to the forefront, it needs to be dealt with. And you can deal with it in those ways too.
Mhm. Yeah, like, have you ever danced through sorrow,
Right.
right? Have you ever
Right.
sang through anger, right? Like, these are
Mhm. Mhm.
it oh gosh, like, using these modalities that are so primal, they're really helpful and they're so potent, right?
Yeah.
Like, I remember
Yeah.
this one time I was so angry. Oh my God, I was so angry. Something was happening. I had all these responsibilities on my plate and I didn't want them and I was getting so frustrated and I took out my drum and I went outside and I was just like, I'm so mad. Da, da, da. And I just
Mhm.
started to like whatever.
Mhm.
And then the thunder came and then it started
Mm.
raining and I was literally out there and it was just like all moving through. And then that rage turned into sorrow and I was crying because I felt so unnourished and I felt like I wasn't
Mhm.
making my needs met. And that was just, yeah, a really powerful way to move energy. So I think that's like a theme we're talking about that I feel like is just important to reflect on, that energy and healing these things, it has to move out of you. And that's like what
Yeah.
you're describing when these hard things come
Mhm.
up. It's like moving energy, letting it be expressed, being a witness to it. One of my teachers always says, what's coming up is coming up to be released. And that's
Mm.
a really important thing to remember.
Mhm. That's really, really powerful. Although we've said it in many different ways. I think that's the earmark, right? If you take nothing else away, allow it to be that. What's coming up is coming up for release.
Mhm.
I've had women sit with me who have been through violent rape, who have had abusive marriages, who had, experiences with family members as children that, are unspeakable, things like that. And they'll say, I've been in therapy for a year and I've never been able to bring this up. But today I feel like I finally have the power to do that. And it's great. We're going to
Mm,
move through it. And it just keeps coming up for you because it's ready. It's ready to
yeah.
go. It's ready.
And also too, like I just was coming through, like you are mirroring to women the depth in which we can go when we have safe space held.
Mm,
Okay, like
mm,
that's part of
mhm.
it too. It's like we deserve safe space
Yeah,
to allow these things to come through. And yeah, like kudos to you as a facilitator for being able to
mm.
like carry that frequency in your heart and in your field, because that's what the world really needs.
And to you. That's exactly
Thank
what we're both doing. Yeah.
you.
It's one of those things, and I know you feel this way because I can feel it, but we are safe spaces. We come to it with no judgment because we know what the judgment feels like if it's either been provided to us or we've provided it to ourselves. But it is a space where be real, be raw, let's get through it because
Mm-hmm.
there's something beautiful on the other side. Without dark, there is no light.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay.
Yeah, the only way out is through.
What do you find to be, obviously, other than the traumas themselves, but what's the thing that holds us the most?
Our addiction to suffering.
Mm. And we just opened another 3-hour conversation.
I know. Like, yeah, let's go. Um, yeah, yeah, our addiction to suffering. It's we're addicted to lack of safety,
Yeah.
and we don't even realize it. And like you notice this in your life. Like my mom, for example, she is very similar. That she has this in her, and she'll go to like take a great trip with my sister and the kids. I have some nieces and nephews, right, with my sister. And
Mhm.
so she'll go and she'll visit and she'll have this great time and the kids are great. And she'll come back, she'll go, yeah, but the weather was awful. Right. I'll be like,
Mm.
do you really care about this like one part of the perspective? But she does, because for her, it's this is the problem and this is the important thing to pay
Right.
attention to. Problems require my attention. And I think
Mhm.
that when we've been through trauma, we forget that we have to choose like a different program, and we have to rehabilitate
Mhm.
ourselves to choose a
Mm.
different program.
Yeah.
So if we've been in a state of suffering and hurt and trauma, we sometimes feel like that's our identity. And then we continue to manifest these experiences because
Yeah.
they support that perspective. And then there's also, this weird game we play with like never feeling safe,
Yeah.
and like that's such a story. And like, I also at the same time acknowledge that there are many people in the world who are not safe,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Right.
that's yes, 100%. And if there are people listening to this with who resonate with that perspective, then you are one of the people that can choose safety. Like you have a roof over your
Mhm.
head, you have a cell
Mhm.
phone, you have the ability to be listening to this podcast, probably in a nice car, right? Like,
Right.
you got
Yeah.
your needs met. And like that's in a way, even though we don't have everything we want, like we should be able to feel safe. And it's crazy to me
Mhm.
that majority of people in the Western world who have more security and more safety and more of their human needs met on a regular basis than majority of the entire planet
Right.
feel the most unhappy and the most unsafe.
Mhm.
You're like, come on.
Because they're yeah, because they're living the most disconnected.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I have 2 things that came up for me. Safe. It's our number one thing. Without it, we can't find all of the beautiful things we've been talking about. So,
No.
what is your definition of safety, right? You need to be asking yourself that. I mean,
Hmm.
no one sits us down and says, "Okay, Give me your definitions of your emotions. Give me your definitions of safety. Give me your whole
Yeah.
individual, right?
We
Like
should do that. That should be school.
100% kindergarten through high school.
Yeah.
What is going on here, right?
Define your unique intrinsic values.
Yes.
Like,
We have to have like a name for it. I don't know what it is,
I
but yeah.
won't mind it.
Intrinsic knowledge 101, 2, 3, 4,
Yeah.
right?
Mm,
Right. Yeah.
intrinsic
But
wisdom.
there we have it, right? But, what is your definition of safety? What does that look like? What does it feel like? And how do you get there,
Mhm.
right? That's a big, big thing. But what came up for me is I have a bunch of people, I love you all, I do, in my lives that are complainers. Holy crap, quit
Yeah.
complaining. But really, that's about a need that's not being met. And generally, it's not anything outside of you. It's you. It's you not meeting you. And so we can always find a problem, like you said, your sister. It's so funny to me. I'll say, "Well, what exactly is the problem?" And they'll tell me, and I'm like, No, no, no. I don't think you heard the question. What's the problem?"
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't like the weather." I'm like, "Are you in control of that?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, "So tell me what the problem is again," right? Like
Yeah.
you're creating a bad day out of a really great environment. Why would you do that?
Mhm.
One big thing that I teach, and I'm gonna hand it over because it's not something I've talked about in nearly 300 episodes on the podcast. So
Oh,
I'll hand this
wow.
over, right? Every time you find yourself saying but, ask yourself, is that an impasse? The answer is yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Is that a roadblock? Is this a situation where you can use the word yet instead of but?
Mm.
If you can find the roadblock, that means that the thought pattern isn't working for you.
Yes. 100%. I love that. I
It goes
love
to
that.
right, it goes to everything we've been talking about,
It
though. It's so
does.
simple, so simple.
It's recognizing our own authority
Mhm,
and
mhm.
our own divine capability that we have to really create massive change in our life and our deservingness, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like that's also part of it. And I think also too, I just feel really called to say like be gentle in the corrections because I think that
Mm,
just in that concept of gaslighting, something that can happen for a lot of us is that we feel bad or we feel like we're recognizing these patterns within ourselves and then we go into a state of feeling bad that we feel bad. So,
right.
for example, we're like, man, I was really angry and I feel bad about that. And like now I feel bad that I felt bad. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like we're like,
Yeah,
man, I feel bad that I acted that way. Right. And then we go into
right.
this kind of distortion of, judging our own natural states of emotion. So I think it's just really important as
Mhm.
we talk about like creating change and shifting our vibration and becoming something new that we also welcome that with a lot of patience and a lot of
Yeah.
understanding that we are human and we're going to have a human experience and we're not going
Mhm.
to be perfect and we're okay with that.
Beyond the fact of the truth of the matter is that your emotions, your feelings, the experiences that you have are driven by the energy, the impulse. You're
Mhm.
feeling bad about the impulse that's happening in the brain that, again, we have no control over. We can control it once it's present and we have
Mhm.
awareness of it, but the initial pop of whatever it is that we're feeling, generally not.
Right, right. It's a triggered response, right?
Right,
Triggered
right.
response. So yeah, being able to look at that objectively, like, for me, like I'm really good at this now and I wasn't always, but when I have say it was a trigger, right? Like something triggers me. I don't like that language. I
I
feel like
don't
that's
either.
really
Yeah.
unhealthy. I say, something activated me, right? Something has
Mm,
shifted my energy a little bit. Like why? And rather than being frustrated by that, I actually just give a moment of space and a moment of breath to
right.
be like, okay, what can I observe here, right? Like let me slow down, let me see what's happening. And that's just a really helpful practice
Mhm.
to take a minute and to not distract ourselves with the judgment that we're being triggered or that we're
Right.
feeling something bad to just be like holding space for what's present. That's it.
Yeah. I love that you do that. I actually do the same.
Yeah.
My verbiage is I feel something coming up.
I like that.
Yeah, so either way, right? I
Yeah.
feel something coming up, and I have a tendency to take really big, deep breaths, and people around me are like, What's wrong? Like nothing. I'm feeling something coming up. I'm just
Yeah.
sitting in it for a second. Like there's nothing wrong with that,
Mm.
you
I
know?
really like that because it's also like, some people are like, I'm really angry right now, or I'm
Hmm.
really overwhelmed. And then you find yourself like becoming that emotion,
Right.
whereas what you're saying is like, I am the person observing this
Absolutely.
thing, it's happening. And
Hmm.
so because I'm observing it, it's outside of me. And that gives us a different perspective.
Yeah. No ownership in it.
Hmm.
Right. I don't have
Accountability
to.
and authority,
Yeah.
but no attachment.
There you go. Exactly. I
Yeah.
don't have to take this as something that stays with me,
Right.
you know, put it in the mental box and let it go, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let it go. Oh my gosh, you know what? We have been talking for almost an hour and if we could have
I
400 more hours.
love
In
it.
the effort of time, I'm going to have to tell you that I need you to come back because we have to have more conversations.
I
There's
love
so much. We just
that.
barely touched the
I
surface, I feel
know.
like.
I know. It's beautiful.
I know. Okay, so give us some advice. What's the
Mm.
one thing you wish people knew?
Oh man. Just one thing.
I know.
I would not have an Instagram account if I just needed to tell people one thing. Like
I
I need
know. I know. I
many
know.
things. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think I just wish people knew that they were enough. It's
Mhm.
like you're intrinsically enough for every desire you have, for every longing you have, for everything that you think is important to you, for the emotions you want to feel, for the love you want to receive, for the impact you want to have, for the creative endeavors you want to pursue. I mean, like it's just if you knew that you were enough, how much time wouldn't you waste?
Ooh.
That's
Oh,
it. That's
I
it.
feel that from my stomach to my throat to my head. How much time would you not waste?
Hmm.
Mm, so much.
So much.
So much. You can see it if you're watching, you can feel it in me. I'm like, oh, so much time. So
Yeah,
much time.
it's crazy. It's the
It
biggest
is crazy.
distraction of the human population is the story that we are unworthy. It's the
Yeah.
biggest distraction and it's like on purpose,
Yeah.
it's the shameful part of it. But
Mhm.
conversation for another day.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a beautiful lady that I've worked with, and I consider her a friend now. And she's often will say, someone said to her, "Can you imagine how powerful you would be when you get out of your own way?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I can actually. Absolutely. I love that saying though, because it's so
Yeah,
true.
it is.
Okay, you mentioned Instagram. There's a
Mm-hmm.
massive following there because of your brilliance. So tell
Oh,
everybody where to find you, where they can find you for the courses. And then
yeah.
I'm sad that we're going to have to wrap it
I
up.
know. I feel kind of sad too. I feel really sad too, actually, because this has been really fun and not every podcaster holds as incredible space as you. It's really cool to riff and flow and
Yeah.
weave and just be like, I appreciate that. Yeah, so riffing and flowing and being, I mean, I do that all on Instagram. My
Yeah.
handle is Lauren of Love, Lauren. And yeah, the Lauren of Love brand, it's super cool. So laurenoflove.com. I have tons of courses there.
Mm,
I have courses for people healing chronic illness, for people just on healing journeys, for people who are on entrepreneur journeys, because
mm,
I love being in the world of creative impact. And that's really
yeah.
important to me to help the world do the same. And yeah, so laurenoflove.com. And then I also have the Lauren of Love podcast where I
Hmm.
riff on all the things over there too.
I love it. Well, we have to wrap it up. And
Mhm.
in the vein of how we always leave, would you honor us by giving us three deep, meaningful gratitudes that you hold?
Mm. Oh, yeah. So the first thing that's coming up is that I'm deeply grateful for my womb, which I think for a long time I harbored a lot of like resentment and shame around. And I'm just really
Mhm.
grateful that I get to be a feminine being in this lifetime and I get to have a beautiful portal to the universe in my body. Like, I think that's just so
Mhm.
incredible. So, I honor that. with a lot of gratitude. How I'm deeply grateful for seasons, man, the seasons of the world, like ebbing and flowing through life, where it's not just the same thing day in and day out. We get to experience ebbs and flows and winters and springs. And, as that relates to all aspects of life, I'm just really grateful for that. And then I'm really grateful for this is a funny one, but just what's coming up is I'm so grateful for my hair. When I was chronically sick, I was losing all of my hair and I actually almost shaved my head. So being able to be in this state of being in remission for chronic illness for the past like 3.5, 4 years. Yeah, just really celebrating that and the fact that I get to have nice long hair.
I love it. I love it. I think those are all beautiful. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for being this beacon of light and love that we so desperately need, and putting the time and intention that you are into the world. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for witnessing me, Mama. It was an honor to be here with you. And yeah, I loved it. So fun, Danielle. To many, many more. I'm here for it all.
Me too. Me too. Thank you. Wow. That's all I can say. I truly do mean I look forward to exploring more topics with Lauren. What all of this comes down to is this. We all have a unique journey that's not too far off from someone else's. While our roads may seem worlds apart, they truly aren't. There is always someone there to hold your hand who understands at some level. If you found yourself holding back, downgrading your worth, or self-gaslighting, you do have the ability to turn your inner conversation and outward behavior into something healed and certainly most productive on all levels. Yes, it takes time. No, it's not always easy, but it is absolutely possible. If you want to explore that, you can always reach out to Lauren or myself. You can find her on Instagram at Lauren of Love. You can also listen to her podcast, Lauren of Love Podcast, where you've listened to this show, or you can visit her website at www.laurenoflove.com. Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you've enjoyed these tips for bettering your life and are seeking daily inspiration and additional tools and tips, follow me on social media at Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Clapper, and now Threads. Or you can visit my show notes, my blog, and all of the great information and courses I offer on getyourlifetogethergirl.com. I also encourage you to share this episode with family and friends, rate this podcast, and also be sure that you hit subscribe so you do not miss another episode like this. Thank you again for being such a valuable part of this community. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.